we've just heard your presidential address, but for the people who have not been able to attend the conference, could you just say who you are and what your new role is?
I'm Mary James. I'm a professor at Cambridge University, but I've just taken up the role of president of BERA for the next 2 years.
In your presentation, you talked about BERA and educational research to some extent coming of age. Exactly what does that mean?
Well, BERA has existed since 1974, and so we are coming up for 40 years now. And it's grown gradually over that time from quite a small organisation, quite informal, but we've got to the point now where we're quite large, that the challenges in the environment mean that we need to be coordinated and quite serious about some of the things that we face. And so I was reflecting in my talk on the issues that we have encountered in the past and those that we face in the present, in order to determine which way we should go in the future. And there were two dimensions, internal and external dimension, really. First was that our, if you like, our portfolio of activities has expanded quite considerably. And in some ways, we needed to organise that better so that we weren't putting too much pressure on a limited number of people. We have got a vibrant community with a great deal of goodwill, and we need to bring in as many people as we can to help us move forward. We have got a council, and within that council we have now established subcommittees so that we can divvy up the work, if you like, amongst those subcommittees, so they have remits, they have budgets. It doesn't mean to say that they make all the decisions, but they have to bring their decision making back to the council. It has to be ratified then, but it does mean that we can actually distribute the task in the hope that we can actually be much more efficient and effective in what we do. So there's been very, very substantial change in the last year under the leadership of John Gardner as a past president. His work has been amazing. I think this will be a very significant, this last year will be a very significant year for BERA, because he has put in place those, working with council, those committees that will enable us to diversify our work and do more of it in greater depth. We also significantly have moved to to accommodation in London with a permanent staff, which I think will enable us to be much more professional in our work. But at the same time, because of the external circumstances, the national circumstances about contracting resources, the deficit and so forth, and the effects that has on higher education and research in particular, we have to think about the way we look out. So we have established, I think, and now a very good foundation for our work. And I think in the coming years, in my presidency, there will be two key objectives. One will be to consolidate the internal structures and the working of those, the efficient working of those. And also, I think, developing one particular aspect of it, and that is capacity building, which might mean a working group across our organisation, because we clearly need to draw into our organisation not just educational researchers from academic organisations, universities, but those who work doing research in other areas like think tanks, government departments and so forth, to enrich our own community and to enable more dialogue. And that indicates the second area that we need to develop, and that is our external alliances, I think. Both to communicate our research and also to understand what the policy context and the needs of a rapidly and changing policy context require of us as researchers. And my feeling is I'm very much an educational researcher, and I've always worked with schools and practitioners and also policymakers. And I think the interface between practice and policy with research is going to be increasingly important, both for our survival but also for the public benefit.
For those lecturers and other people involved in educational research in universities and beyond, in the school sectors, for those people who are involved there as well, when they look at the changes inside the organisation, there's a lot of internal things, as you referred to. What are they likely to see, perhaps, as the biggest changes?
People people outside, well, of course those are internal, but already we've started, publications I think are probably our most visible thing, you know, sort of tangible things you can pick up. We've always had a flagship journal which is very important in the academic community. That's the BERA Journal, British Educational Research Journal, and that will continue to be important to us, and we're taking on other academic journals as well, as you know, the British Journal of Education and Technology, and possibly a review journal will have, etc. So that people will have access to those. I think the review journal might be quite important. We'll need to promote it like that, because the point that I was making in our talk is that practitioners and policymakers, they don't always want the single study, they want the review of the field, and that will actually provide a review of the field. But in addition to that, we've begun to develop and publish an insights series of booklets, and as I said, booklets, small digests in natural language, which actually do highlight the implications of research for policy and practice, are probably going to be something that we will want to grow, because that's the kind of thing that gets picked up by practitioners and policymakers. Policymakers have got very little time to read anything in depth. They probably would never read anything from research in depth, but what they would ask is, you know, if they can pick up something of interest, then they might well ask some of their advisors to read the detail and so forth. So those sort of digests, like research briefings, the booklets that we've had one on violence in schools, for instance, has been picked up quite extensively and found to be extremely accessible. The format might change slightly, but those are the areas that I think we will try to develop. That's in terms of paper, but we're also revamping our website. I mean, you know, visually it's looking, I've only seen the sort of drafts of it, but the visually it's looking much more engaging. But it should give us access to an awful lot of resources, and to also dialogues, you know, and conversations within our community. So that's the kind of thing that will be developed, and also hopefully more activities, you know, as well. The conference, this kind of conference, is a big activity for education researchers associated with BERA during the year. But there's a lot of other small conferences. We have a Black and Ethnic Minority Researchers Conference, once again focused on researchers, but then there are other activities where you can actually, certainly in the past, and I would quite like to see it regenerated, where you might have regional seminars, day seminars on particular themes around, for instance, publication of things like reviews, that would draw in much more of a practitioner and policymaker in localities, audience, you know. So that's the kind of thing. So I think it's internally consolidation, externally building alliances and building the channels for communication and mediation of research to policy and practice. And sometimes encouraging, supporting people, not denigrating them, when they actually do try to work in the difficult researcher-policy interface.
It does strike me that you've become the president right now, a very interesting time. There's a number of challenges that we face because of the economic and political climate. So in terms of, you know, what the focus and the challenges ahead, what do you think the biggest challenges are for you as president and for the organisation, perhaps, as you start your presidency?
Well, I mean, survival as an organisation will be part of that. But I think, you know, in the first instance, you have to survive financially. And in order to do that, I think that we will want to expand our membership, and we're going to embark on a membership drive, and looking very much within and beyond the community of researchers in universities to develop our membership. So that's one thing. We've also expanding this publications portfolio, not just that it does provide an income which can put BERA on a sound financial footing. It is a sound financial footing, but we don't, in the current climate where you could even see contraction, for several reasons, one being the demographic profile of researchers, and some of them, the baby boomers, leaving the system. But at the same time, you know, universities seeing that as an opportunity to make smaller units, departments of education. In some, I don't think there'll be many huge expansions at the moment in terms of personnel. So we've got to get the quality, because we're not going to have the quantity in some ways. That's going to be really important. So the financial security of the organisation is important, and I think that that is being well looked after by BERA Council, and you know, we have a very good treasurer. But in other respects, I think it is about reading the runes, I suppose, keeping a watching brief on what is happening in the external world, seeing where the opportunities are. Now, we won't take on, BERA is an association, and it doesn't engage in projects itself. But what it can do is mediate, and it can actually alert people to opportunities for research that do exist, and perhaps actually nudge and guide. Part of the thing I was doing in my presidential was to saying that I think in the light of changes in funding, we've got to be ambitious. We can't hunker down. We've got to do the reverse. You know, we've got to take big risks, and probably we have to form alliances with other people, not just in our own department, beyond them, in our universities, in other departments and so forth, working with those, you know, perhaps in the social sciences, perhaps in economics, and perhaps in the humanities, so that we can put in to funding councils and others who might be providing really ambitious proposals that are really exciting, that address pressing issues in the current world, but retain really solid, you know, sort of theoretical and based in scholarship as well. I think that's the kind of thing that we will have to be considering. So, and that takes courage. And sometimes, in order to build the confidence, that was the theme of researchers, there's a kind of collective. You know, you draw courage and confidence from other people, from the community that actually is supporting you. Some people are very brave and they can go off in their own way, but I think sometimes if you feel that you're going in the right direction, but you've got other people supporting you, that is actually quite important. So I would also like to see in my presidency the development of the SIGs, the Special Interest Group, as those are variable, you know, they have different organisations, but as a real basis for bringing people together to think through the kinds of directions that they might take their research individually and collectively.
There's been many ideas discussed at the conference in all the different sessions and the different themes. As we've come to the end of this conference this year, if there was one idea that you would like people to take away and think about, what would that be?
Well, I suppose it has to be in the title, doesn't it, really? And it was about growing confidence, and that can be, as I said right at the beginning, it's ambiguous in some ways, and it can be understood and interpreted in different ways. I think that, you know, we want to encourage people outside our community to have confidence in us as researchers. I don't think we've always been very good at that, because we have actually engaged in sort of internecine disputes. I think that's happening far less. I've been a member of BERA for over 30 years, I think it is. And, you know, sometimes there are uncomfortable discussions. I think that people now are much more willing to say we do take different positions, we have different perspectives, but we recognise and value each other's perspectives. And so the dialogue is constructive, not destructive. So, and I think that's an indicator of confidence, actually. Because I think, you know, you get into these destructive debates when you're not very confident. The more confident that people are in their own scholarship and their own research, I think the more open they are to other people and other views. And so, and I think that's absolutely crucial, both internally and externally. And so I would like to see, I think there is a sense, I'm getting a sense over these 30 years, that there is increasing confidence within our community, but that's got to be built on, that's got to increase. And the ultimate goal, I think, is that we actually gain more confidence from practitioners and policymakers who are interested in our work. And I think often practitioners do have confidence in research if they can get access to it. And our problem there is communication, you know, is to actually reach those parts that we don't normally reach. But within policymakers, there has been suspicion of as I said, you know, the educational establishment of which we were supposed to be part. And I think we've got to not get on our high horse. We've got to say, we are members of this society, we are members of the community, and we have a contribution to make to democratic processes, to the democracy. It's not necessarily more valuable than anybody else. You know, big egos don't wear well with policymakers and so forth. So we've got to say, we've got to be humble, but say, actually, we do believe in what we have to say, and there's a value in what we have to say, but to communicate in ways that are not mystifying, that actually are very straightforward and clear.